Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us, Institute Hospitality Midlands branch. We've got a slide up here which just shows the variety of sectors that are represented by you all. And it was quite interesting reading for us as a committee, actually, looking at the representation and the questions and the priorities will obviously reflect to some extent the different sectors within hospitality that you're all working from. Today, the latest in our webinars, we are absolutely delighted to welcome Kate Nicholls, recently recognised in the News Honour list with an OBE, the CEO of UKHospitality, and another of other roles, including Chair of the Tourism Alliance and Chair of the Mayor of London's Nighttime Commission. It's worth saying at this point, Kate, we've, as well as asking for questions, there were a significant number of comments thanking you for everything you're doing for our industry, which I would echo on everyone's behalf to you directly. So thank you very much. Kate, would you like to say a few words to everybody?
Yes, thank you very much. I'm just going to give a sort of brief overview of what we're doing at the moment, why we're working, and sort of an introduction to our topic today, and then leave most of the questions and answers so we can delve into the issues that are of real great interest to the people on the call. Just for those of you who don't know UKHospitality, we were formed in 2018, so we merged the two main trade bodies, British Hospitality Association, who looked after hotels and contract catering, ALMR, which I was the chief executive of previously, which was pubs, bars, restaurants, nightclubs, casual dining, and brought together into one trade body, one strong authoritative voice for the whole of the sector. So we represent 700 member companies, over 85,000 outlets, and between them they would be the bulk of the sector in hotels, restaurants, pubs. We have about 95% of the sector who is in membership of ours, and that strength and depth is what is so important, gives us our power to be the voice and the champion to government, but also to other interested stakeholders, both locally, nationally, regulatory bodies, the media, and then when we talk about careers, in influencing public opinion in a positive way. And that's the role of the sector. And we represent everything from a single site independent business right the way through to the major national chains. We cover weddings, wedding venues, events, conferences, hotels, as I say, and holiday accommodation, self-catering, nightclubs, restaurants, coffee shops, so the whole breadth and gamut of the hospitality sector. And our role is threefold. First of all, we're there to promote the sector as a great place to grow, work and invest. And as part of that, we provide the statistics to be able to show size and scale and economic importance. And that's been as we've gone through this pandemic, to be able to make sure that government is aware of the size, scale and importance of the sector. Second is to provide a protective environment within which our members can grow their businesses, grow their teams, support their investment, particularly for those SMEs who are in that growth. So it's about providing advice, guidance, support on compliance, but also key business activities, ways in which they can improve their business, insight and intelligence. And then the third area is about protecting the interests of the industry when it comes to the regulatory environment, both campaigning for a more supportive environment, pushing back against intrusive government legislation, and just campaigning to make sure that the industry has the recognition and support it deserves. And so we're sort of champion, defence policy, insurance and shield is how I sort of like to describe it. And as part of what we do, as I say, looking at that big picture, hospitality as a sector, we went out very quickly and very early to talk about COVID. We were building on the reputation and the engagement we'd had at a central level with government over the Brexit crisis. So never let a crisis go to waste. You can always make an opportunity out of a good crisis. So the first of all was the Brexit crisis, where we were positioning hospitality as being a critical part of the economic infrastructure, a key part of the UK culturally, socially and economically. And so we were able to go very quickly to government and say, look, at the end of 2019, beginning of 2020, we were a sector that had a turnover of £139 billion. That's bigger than aerospace, automotive and pharmaceuticals put together. £39 billion of that is direct spend by foreign tourists in our hotels, restaurants, pubs, bars, music venues. That means that we're the third largest export earner in the UK. We are bigger in terms of spend by foreign visitors in your premises than all of food and drink manufacturing exporting put together. And 3.2 million people employed in the sector, making us the third largest private sector employer, another 1.5 million in the supply chain. So all of that sort of statistics that we were able to quantify meant that government at the end of 2019, beginning of 2020, just as we were going into the crisis, could understand how important we were for them and what the impact of this coronavirus crisis would be as we spiraled out of control and that tsunami of restrictions hit in March. The final stat is £40 billion worth of tax that we return to the government each and every year, £1 in every 3, which means that that's the entire social care budget or the entire defence budget or the entire Brexit divorce bill, whichever one you prefer. It did mean, and my first meeting with government when we talked about COVID was the 21st of January 2020. So right at the very start, before probably any of you were talking about COVID, we were working with the government to say, this is coming, you need to get into a situation where you can support our sector, because restrictions, whether it's just a sort of mild blip on the international tourism and travel agenda, or whether it was the black swan that it turned out to be, you're going to need to be ready to support the industry all the way through. And I think, you know, that stood us in good stead when we were talking to government, because they have provided a package of support. I know it's not enough, but I think it has been significant. And without that strong voice from hospitality, we would be in a far worse state than we are now. Now, as we come out of 2020, our sales down 49%, our employment down 28%. We've undoubtedly had a very heavy hit, and there is much, much more to do. But starting with that positive discussion about where we were at 2020 shows where we can get back to. Because the other point about hospitality is that it can bounce back very rapidly if it's got the right support mechanisms in place to allow us to. No sector of the economy is faster at creating jobs in all skill levels, all age groups, all parts of the economy, and in upskilling people through our apprenticeships and our career programs. So since the financial crash, we generated 1 in 6 of net new jobs each year, and we invested £10 billion in our high streets each year. So you can see what a powerful engine of economic growth we can be if we have the support to get us through. Now, clearly, we've got a critical set of circumstances now where we've got 2 to 3 months of real pain before we can look towards the ending of restrictions and easing of restrictions. And so our job at UK Hospitality now is to say we're starting the year at our lowest ebb. You need to support us, government, and then we can rapidly help you deliver your ambitions for economic growth, economic investment, levelling up agenda, if we get support in place. So 3 points that we're working on at the moment with government. One is a sort of 30-day plan, a clear staged exit strategy for the hospitality sector linked to vaccine rollout, a commitment from the government not to go back into lockdowns, not to go back into restrictions, and an ambition to try and make sure that we don't exit through tiers, which cause us so much headache and so much disruption with a weekly changing menu of what you need to do. So we want to exit with national restrictions, accepting that there will be some restrictions for some period of time after we exit, but clearly trying to secure the start of the Easter season and then a phased easing of restrictions as we come out into summer so that we can start to trade profitably, because it's a key emphasis that we need to make to government. It's not just enough to be open. We all know what the problems were over the course of Q3 and Q4, where we were technically open, but making a loss, technically open, but unable to trade. And particularly when you got into parts of the country being in tier 3 and unable to travel, it had a knock-on effect on our hotels across the country. So that's the key part that we're working on now. And it's revisiting the work that we did in May, making sure that the government understands that the COVID secure protocols that UK Hospitality worked on to allow us to reopen in July were the toughest in the world, and crucially addressed all the risk factors that SAGE has identified being a problem to do with hospitality, so that we can make sure that we're having a commitment to open safely. Secondly, moving into sort of 90 days It's about rebuilding balance sheets, tackling the level of indebtedness that the sector's suffering from that will hold us back from growing and recovering as quickly as we possibly can, making sure that not just hospitality can recover quickly, but also the economy as a whole can recover quickly, and particularly when it comes to major town and city centres like Birmingham and London and Manchester and Leeds, that we can get growth and investment coming back, because those are the hardest hit sectors of our economy. We can see already that in our sector, that's going to be the longest one to take the longest time to recover, is our town and city centre hotels, which are so reliant upon business travel and international travel. So in order to make sure that we can rebuild our balance sheets, make sure that we can attract the customers back in, the budget of the 3rd of March will be critical, where we're campaigning for an extension of that business rates holiday. Critically, I think we need that for a whole year, while the government reforms business rates longer term, but we can't go back to having our high business rates imposed on the 1st of April. And secondly, it's about extending the VAT cut and maintaining that reduced rate of VAT. That will allow us, both of those things will allow us to continue to invest, to grow, and to have the confidence to be able to get back investment into our people. Subsequent to that, talking in the budget about retention of a flexible furlough if restrictions last longer, making sure that we've got that support as we bring people back in gradually, because what we know from July's experience is that people will come back in for shorter hours, and we want to make sure our teams are protected so that we can maintain that investment in training and upskilling. And then finally, tackling the issue of rent, which for so many high street businesses is going to be crippling from 1st of April. And then longer term, the third part of our plan is about future recovery. It's about making sure that we can invest back into the careers, selling hospitality as a career of choice, working with the government providers and education establishments to invest in apprenticeships, T-levels, training and upskilling, capturing and conveying that positive goodwill towards hospitality that we've seen from so many members of the public over the crisis, and also journalists and politicians, to make sure that we can put back in place the tourism sector deal that we had developed with the government, where they would support us to do that upskilling and that levelling up. As part of that as well, the future recovery, there is a tourism recovery plan, there is a high street hospitality plan, which will look at the longer term structural changes that we need to see to make sure that our businesses can thrive, survive, and then get back to that level of investment and success that we had as I started my talk with you about at the end of 2019, growing 4% year on year, and also making sure that we were generating 1 in 6 of net new jobs. That's how we want to be positioning ourselves going forward with the government, that we can be part of the solution to drive forward the economic recovery. Hospitality will then deliver what it does best, and it will help to put Britain on the world stage when we host major events like the G7 in Cornwall, COP26 in Glasgow, and of course the Commonwealth Games in the West Midlands. The government needs our sector to be at full strength. We need our sector to be powering on all cylinders and attracting the right kind of people to come back to work in hospitality. And then we will go back to delivering that £40 billion tax stake, repaying the investment that the country has made in us to be able to rebuild our public services. I think that's probably as good a point as any to stop and then go over, because I know we've got lots of questions that have come in, and there are quite a few real specifics that people want to do a deep dive into, but hopefully that sets the scene for what we're working on at UK Hospitality.
Lovely, thank you very much, Kate. We do have a lot of questions. Broadly structured, so everyone knows where we're going with the questions, into areas firstly around COVID support, secondly around representation, and then finally around the future, which is a lot of what Kate was just talking about there, but not just about recovery, a lot of questions about students and careers as well, which you also mentioned, Kate. The first one then, around COVID support. And we would like, this is following on from the Q&A we did with Andy Street last year, your feedback, please, on a quick poll, if we can put that up, looking at your priority for support. So 3 areas we've identified, and actually, thankfully, Kate just mentioned, but interested to see if you could only have one of those, or which one of those would be your top priority, which the second, and if you begrudgingly had to have not all 3, which would be the third, I suppose, is the the question. So questions around, while you're getting on with that, questions around COVID support. Thanks to Stuart Gillespie, Kate Tabor, Gary Atkinson, Irene Allen, Ross Millett and Kimberly Ramsey for these. I won't go with them all directly as you've written them, but the gist of many of these are very similar. I'll dive straight in, Kate. You mentioned reduced VAT extension. What do you think the chances are that the industry will actually get that relief based on your conversations?
Oh gosh, it's a tricky one to be able to assess. I think there's a high likelihood that we will have an extension, not least because obviously the government has saved money over the last 5 months. By the time we get to 31st of March, the industry will broadly have been closed for the last 5 months. So the government has saved money. It hasn't had to pay out and subsidise that reduced VAT because we have not benefited from it because we're closed. I think it's inevitable that if restrictions go on for longer and we do lose that start to the Easter trading season, you will get an extension in that reduced rate. I think the question is, how long will that extension be? Will it be sufficient? And what platform does it give to build for lobbying for a permanent reduced rate? So I would have put it at sort of 50-50 on it being to the 6 months or more.
Thank you. On these questions, if anybody who's posed these questions would like to come back and just sort of a further comment or a follow-up question, please do jump in. And I know we want a bit of a dialogue here. We can't quite have a free-for-all with everybody involved, but for those of you put the questions, if you'd like to any more detail, please do jump in. Another one, really, picking up what you were talking about, furlough and flexible. Are we pushing to have the furlough qualification date of the 30th of October changed, as there will be employees recruited after this date, which employers cannot furlough?
Yes, we have raised that with the Treasury. We raised it with them when we went into second lockdown and then when we came out into the tiers, and we've raised it again with them first week back when we went into third lockdown. At the moment, Treasury is not budging on that date and is concerned to protect those people who were employed longer term, but we are continuing to lobby them about furlough. So I suppose there's a sort of short term where we're trying to get the current systems fixed, whether that's furlough, grants, all of the sort of inconsistencies that are coming through. We're trying to get those fixed before we move on to the next phase of the budget. But Treasury is being quite difficult at the moment in not looking at any of those things. So the other bits about furlough that we've raised are around holiday pay. They're around the sort of people who've had a pay rise as a result of national living wage coming through or an intervening pay rise and not being able to claim that fully back. And we've also raised the point about people who've given their notice in not being able to be paid during a furlough period. But as I say, at the moment, Treasury is not entertaining any amendment to that scheme. So I think it's quite unlikely you'll see that date brought forward.
Obviously, you'll keep asking the question, I'm sure, though. This next question is around rent, which you mentioned. The government was supposed to be introducing legislation to make landlords negotiate with tenants regarding rent arrears. Moving forward, however, this hasn't come to fruition. What are we doing as a collective to impress the importance of this for the industry?
Well, I think the main thing that the government did in terms of legislation was to put in place the two protections. So you've got a lease forfeiture moratorium and you've got a debt enforcement moratorium. Both of those expire on the 31st of March. So our key message at the moment now is going back to government to say that protection needs extending if we haven't been able to open. If you can't open and trade, you can't pay rent. Or you can't make a rent payment. So both of those protections remain. The debt enforcement one is broader than rent, so it gives a general protection to say if you're unable to pay a debt of whatever nature because of COVID, you have protection. People can't take you to court, can't do statutory winding up petitions. The second part that was talked about in terms of legislation to require discounts or rescheduling of debt. The government never promised legislation. It promised a code of practice, which is sort of non-statutory. So that is out at the moment. The government is working to strengthen that, and we're continuing to lobby for that to be made a statutory provision so that the government can intervene to try and help, because as things stand at the moment, unless the landlord willingly negotiates to reschedule that debt, there's nothing to require them to do so, nothing to compel them. So we're talking to government about how they can put that code of practice on a statutory footing to try and require it, move towards more of a Spanish model or an Australian model where there is legislation that requires landlords above a certain size to offer a waiver or a debt deferment, and then they are given tax credits to do that. But again, that's all tied up with the budget submissions that are being made by a number of organisations, and we're working across leisure, gyms and retail to try and get that solution. So all of the lessee voices are coming together to try and push for that solution, because I think unless we get that, you will really undermine the recovery and you will see large numbers of business failures from the 1st of April.
Thank you. Got a question here, which is not something you mentioned, but it'd be interesting to see what your views on are. Is it time to ask the government on behalf of our sector for compensation as a, let's say, percentage of 2019 profits or similar, as it will be more than 12 months since the government prevented us from carrying out our lawful business, recommended we take out loans, etc. What do you think?
Again, it's something that we have talked to the Treasury at Number 10 about. We've given reference to the approach that's been taken in Germany and Holland and also in France, particularly with the Christmas cancellations, where they all moved towards a percentage of lost revenue. So in France, they gave up to £10,000. So I suppose it's equivalent, it's capped. In France, they said you could have 20% of lost revenues for December compared to 2019, capped at £10,000 as a compensatory payment. Germany, it's 50%. So it is quite a big slug of money that you get, again, capped depending on the size. The government has resisted that. Their approach is to move towards grants, and they still prefer the grants. But as I say, they're now pushing back strongly against that, saying their alternative approach has led to a similar amount, similar payout being made to British businesses as you've got in France and Germany.
Okay, thank you. Kate, have we got the results from that poll before we move on to representation? Thank you. There you go, Kate. That's what the attendees feel, VAT reduction as the highest priority of those three. Thank you very much, everyone. Okay, so in terms of representation, and as part of this, we are, of course, also talking about the Minister for Hospitality. Questions I'm going to group together. Thank you for Dr. Yanis Pantelides, Craig Routledge, Graham Hardiman, Dale Nix, Joe Bradford, Harpreet Batan, and Sam Goss. So I think the first question is, what are your thoughts on the 11th of January parliamentary debate for the Minister for Hospitality?
I think it was a really positive debate. I think as a point in time, in order to demonstrate political and public support for the hospitality sector, and also to demonstrate that there was an appetite, a desire for the government to do more to support the sector, it was hugely important and symbolic. So because of the COVID restrictions in Westminster, you don't normally get many MPs able to speak in a debate. So we had the maximum number of MPs that could be present physically to speak were. We had a waiting list of MPs wanting to come and speak. And you had more people in that chamber for the Westminster Hall debate than I've seen all year. So I think from a demonstration of support to the government at a time when lots of people were saying you're not doing enough to support the sector, you're not taking account of what the sector needs, and you're not listening to the sector, it was a real, tangible, visible sign of that. And we've had letters of support around it from about 200 to 300 MPs. Now, as a point in time, that's it as far as the petition is concerned, and the government has sort of, takes note of it and moves on. But I think that in terms of the influence that has in the budget discussions, the deliberations about next steps, really important, and more important for that than it is actually in securing the minister. I think that will happen. And I know that quite a few of the questions have come through as to, do I think it's likely that we will get somebody? At the start of this crisis, we didn't have a minister that was responsible for hospitality, and nobody looked after hospitality. We have a really good minister for tourism, and hotels and holiday accommodation sits within that, and that's in DCMS. And he is really good and really effective, but that's only one part of our sector, and it ignores the whole infrastructure. The key point there is that obviously it's international tourism that weighs more heavily than it does domestic. So at the start of the COVID crisis, we had been talking to the government about how they were going to represent hospitality, who was going to look after the high street. And at the start of the crisis, they put in place a new unit within Bays, 12 officials. Ministers come and go, civil servants last a lifetime. And once you've got 12 people looking after your sector, that's really important and really symbolic. So there's two important things. It means we now have 3 departments looking after our industry: DCMS on tourism, DEFRA on food, and now Bays, which is the big, strong business department championing hospitality as an employer and as a sort of economic generator. And they are all the people that put pressure on the Treasury and Number 10 to make sure that they do the right thing. So I think having those ministers in place is really important. We have a de facto hospitality minister who was the one who replied to the debate, who's been chairing the weekly sessions. So you've got 2 big voices now, one talking about hotels and holidays and accommodation, and one talking about pubs, bars and restaurants. That's why I've just seen something come up in the chat about MPs name checking their local pubs. One, it's inevitable. They need local publicity. It's about votes. That's why they do it. Whatever they need to do to name check to get through. 2, the pubs and bars and restaurants have gone way beyond writing to their local MPs, and they've all bombarded them, and they have more sites across the country than hotels do. And hotels have been less good, I think, at reaching out to their local MPs than a lot of the pubs. So you've got big chains of pubs that have written for 800 pubs, carpet bombed their MPs, and that's why you get those name checks. It doesn't mean that anybody else in the sector is not important, doesn't mean they haven't registered the whole thing. It is just part of being an MP that's what you do to get local publicity. So please don't take offence at any MP doing it, because it's all grist to the mill. So I think that's really important, and I think it will bleed through. And the fact that the government is already working with us on a hospitality recovery strategy means that you've got that long-term support built in and baked in at a Bays level. Thank you.
I'm picking up the a question here about the sort of, I suppose, the personalities and the priorities. So appreciate you think that we will actually get a minister, but how do you feel about Boris Johnson's refusal to meet with Catherine McKinnell to discuss the position?
It was a cheeky question in the middle of quite a long and lengthy interchange where the Prime Minister was being grilled by the Parliamentary Liaison Committee, and I think he just battered it away. So we will follow it up, and I'm sure that meeting will take place. In the middle of a pandemic, I don't think anybody expected him to say anything else. And certainly when I spoke to Catherine immediately afterwards, she hadn't expected any other answer than what she got. So it's about keeping that public opinion going, and she can vocalise that sort of public support for our sector and keep the pressure on when the time is right.
And a question, I think several of the other questions you've already answered, Kate, thank you. But one here is, what more does the industry need to do to secure a minister for hospitality? Is it fait accompli, or do we need to up our game even more?
I think it's just that continual engagement. It's about making sure that we all write to our local MPs, all write to our local councillors to make sure we reinforce the point. I know everybody's got a little bit of fatigue about this, but we are getting to the point where we're getting through this. We need to get over the hump of the pandemic, and then I think you will start to get into business as usual. MPs themselves are motivated to do things when they get a big post bag. Prime Ministers and the Centre and Cabinet Office are motivated to do things when they get a weight of post. So we just need to keep the pressure on and just keep doing what we're doing, expressing our size, scale and importance, the need for support, and then it will naturally flow through.
Thank you. I'm going to jump to a slightly different question, and it's around the events industry. And this is a theme that we had on our Q&A with Andy Street, where there was a strong feeling that the event industry wasn't being properly represented, their voice wasn't being heard, and they weren't being considered. And sorry to say, it wasn't mentioned in your list of a number of the different sectors just then. So the question is here, thanks to Yvonne Hyde. I know you've been working hard to get events separated. For example, an event at the NEC for 40,000 delegates versus an event in a hotel conference centre for 100 delegates. How are you getting on with that? And I suppose more widely, what can we do around the events industry? Because there is a strong feeling amongst Institute members and those who've attended our webinars that more needs to be done and a greater priority needs to be given to them.
I totally agree with you. I mean, it is something that we've been tackling. Obviously, from our membership point of view, our reach into events is focused around the smaller hotels, conference centres, rather than the major event exhibitors at NEC. So obviously we've been pushing that case with ministers to try and get events restarted. Thought we'd been successful on the 2nd of December when they reopened and we were allowed to have events in all tiers, and the route map for reopening for larger events was signalled, and then of course it was taken away again as a result of going into national restrictions. And yet the same thing applies to weddings and wedding events that are coming through, particularly in hotels, but also separate wedding venues, and both of those issues, events and weddings, they don't exactly fall through the gap, but they don't fit logically into some of the government thinking because of the sort of the more flexible nature of the business, and they're not so property based. So government does have a bit of a blind side when it comes to those sort of property based. But they also come in with nightclubs as being the most challenging to reopen in terms of the volume of people coming from a variety of different parts of the country, all converging and then going away again. So by their nature, rightly or wrongly, they are seen by government as a potential super spreader event. So clearly, as we go through this, vaccination and lateral flow testing are going to be critical to get the industry restarted and out of this. So we're working as well with DCMS on insurance to be able to make sure that the industry can open and has insurance to back the reopening of events, because that's a big problem around pandemic insurance and future insurability. We're also working to try and make sure that the COVID secure protocols are fit for purpose, so that the number of people you can accommodate at a wedding or in an event is set according to your size and capacity of venue, rather than it being an arbitrary cap. And then just trying to make sure that Cabinet Office understands that for events and for weddings, there is a very long lead time. So if you say weddings can restart or events can restart, it's going to take time before you build back that confidence, and it's going to be about 6 to 9 months. But reinforcing with them the sort of international importance, and that if we can't host some of the big shows at the NEC, or we can't host the big conferences globally, once a customer goes elsewhere, they will go elsewhere in future years, and it has a big knock-on effect on the rest of the economy, whether that's the QE2 or the NEC or the XL. So working hard to try and get that restarted, both at a small local level, but at a major national event, and trying to work with other partners in the industry to get that working forward as well.
I suppose if I could sum up for those people from the event industry, maybe that's something that should be on the brief for a Minister of Hospitality to make sure it doesn't fall through the cracks.
I would have thought so. I mean, it is one of those where events sits with DCMS, and it sits from a different part of DCMS than tourism and domestic hospitality. And it's one of those areas where it's just not joined up and it's not logical. And part of it is because there's a number of sectors that this applies to where there isn't a real clear industry SIC code. So where you can identify and quantify food and beverage and accommodation is really easy to see. And if you don't have that visibility within the Treasury, you are largely invisible to the Treasury, and you just fall underneath one of those other ones. So we do need to make sure that we've got classification correct, that we can be identified and we can be quantified. But, the focus for the Treasury is getting high street hospitality open because that's the bulk of the employment and it's the bulk of the revenue that comes through. No disrespect to any of the other sectors, but that's the big economic driver from their point of view.
Thank you. I think we probably need to move on to consider the future recovery. But before I go, I know there's a lot of concern about events. Does anybody from the event industry want anything more to say? That I've seen a few things pop up on the chat. Say directly to Kate.
Hello, I'm Kate Tabor. We have 3 wedding venues and a clay shooting school and a course fishery. So we've got a mixed bag, but it's all leisure. We're all shut at the moment, completely shut. And I think that we find it very disturbing, Kate, that you've said that we are, supposed to be perceived as a super spreader. But as I've just put on the chat, even with the new infection, the new variants, surely, even now the supermarkets and factories and so on are also just as, we're no different now from a football stadium or anything. It's just as easy to catch walking down the street, apparently. So, and if they've sort of got in their heads that, I'll say weddings selfishly, but any event are to be very, very last to open, then why don't we have a specific sort of, I don't know, compensation package or, road? I mean, we can't even furlough everyone and shut our doors. We need to market. We need.
Yes, I totally get it.
Sales girls are receiving calls every day. We've got April and May brides now slowly postponing. Our couples are mostly lovely. We've lost hardly any. However, we are now, well, I'll be honest, 7.5 million down over the past year. And they told us to take out loans. We did so. So now we are, having been very lightly borrowed, we are now, facing repaying loans. We're fine as it happens at the moment, lucky us, but a lot of people aren't. And I think on the 1st of April, it's going to hit the fan.
Absolutely. I totally get it. I'm actively communicating it to ministers in my weekly calls that I have with them so that they are very well aware. We've got lots of wedding venues and event venues within membership that I'm pushing through. My point was not necessarily to say you will be last to open, nor was it that it's my view you are a super spreader, but from the public health division of government that is lobbying very hard about keeping restrictions in place for much longer, keeping tiers in place, talking about restrictions on numbers and social distancing until past next winter. I mean, that is the lobby that we are against. As far as they are concerned, it is about the volume of people who are traveling. It's not necessarily specific to weddings, but it is a common factor amongst a number of these big higher risk venues that they talk about, or higher risk sectors. And they don't discount supermarkets from that. Can I just finish and then you can come back? The thing that distinguishes our venues in the sort of event and wedding space is the potential that you are traveling from wide parts of the country into one space for a prolonged period of time and then back again. And there isn't any way around that. That's what we do. So we now need to work with Public Health England to identify the big mitigation factors, which are lateral flow testing, vaccination, negative tests, and ventilation. And that's the way we will get back reopen more quickly. But I think the vaccination programme allows us to identify that you don't need to be the last to reopen. But we will be working quite hard to make sure that we can get the ability to show people around, the ability to continue to do that, and that the support is there beyond that if any sectors are left behind. But my ambition is not to leave sectors behind.
Well, I mean, firstly, thanks for all your huge efforts. And I just am desperate to make sure that with the new variants, the thinking is changed, because football fans, for instance, come from all over the world and all over the country. Those sort of balcony things, it might not be actually enclosed. They all pass through the same corridors. They all go and get hamburgers and, go to the same loos. It's no different with these new variants. And I just, as long as, I'm sure you are, but as long as the government gets their little, heads round, it's changed.
Yeah, I was just trying to help you understand the other side of the argument, because for the football stadiums and things like that, again, they're in the same situation as we are. They will be right back in the sort of closed and not likely to open. Same with the theatres. There are differences and nuances that the public health teams see and play on that don't necessarily fit our understanding, but I just thought it'd be helpful to try and share that different understanding.
Perfect, thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to move on to look at recovery. Kate, you outlined sort of 30-day plan, 90-day plan, and sort of future recovery you're discussing. Several questions here. Nigel Mann, Hafisa Rasool, Francisco Macedo, Farouk Yunus, Ellie Jones, George Kane, Neil Court. The first one is, if that 30-day, 90-day future plan, what do you see as the timescale for the hospitality recovery? When can we start looking at that, the first bit, the 30-day plan, and all the rest to follow thereafter?
I think 30 days starts at the beginning of January. It's sort of my internal 30-day plan of what I am going to do to focus on in the next 30 days and then the next 90 days as you look out. I think that 90-day horizon, possibly stretching to 100 days, is where we are looking at. If you look at the government's vaccination programme, and this is why they're so reticent to talk to anybody at the moment about reopening, but I think it's an inevitability that the reopening will be linked to vaccination. If they hit it, you would be looking at all the over 70s and the clinically vulnerable vaccinated in their first jab by 15th of February, and their immunity takes place 2 weeks after. They would then accelerate it, and you're looking towards the end of March at getting all your over 50s vaccinated. At that point, you've covered 99% of hospitalizations and deaths. So you are really looking at, is there really any justification for significant economic restrictions after that date? Now, my thinking is that is probably aspirationally when they will look to start reopening hospitality, events, conferences, all of those kind of things. We might get notice of it earlier, but that's probably the earliest. So I think the key question for a lot of people in the room will be, do we get Easter? Do we start with the school holidays? We've probably lost Mothering Sunday, but you could see that might be the timescale for looking towards reopening. If the government knows on the 15th of February where it's at, that it will definitely hit that 31st of March. You've then got that 12-week period after that before people get their second dose and have full immunity, during which time you could justify having some social distancing restrictions in place. But I suspect that those will be around ventilation, hygiene, sanitation. That's what we need to work to get them, rather than they being the arbitrary restrictions. And that's when you will get into the dialogue and the trade-off with government about when do you reopen versus when do you reopen profitably, and when do you reopen with lots of people who are able to come, rather than trying to do weddings for 30 or events for 100 when you've got a 40,000 capacity, all those kind of things. And when can you reopen the F&B elements of sports stadium for the fans? So I suspect that that's the timeline we're looking at, and that the recovery really starts from the 1st of April, when we're looking at being able to get reopen and rebuild. And I think you are looking at end of 2022, early 2023, before we get to pre-COVID levels of revenue.
It's interesting. Kate, if you wouldn't mind putting up, Sarah, if you wouldn't mind putting up a slide. This was your views, the attendees, that just share with everybody about confidence for 2021, and in sort of the background of what you've just described there is really, I suppose, the second half starting to improve, but really it's going to be a year and a half before we're sort of really firing again. Have you got that slide, Sarah? No? Okay, no problem. We'll come back to it. Pop it up as soon as you're ready, please. A question around, so you've got your plan, you're talking about no exit through tiers, a national exit and so on. A question, would a gradual start, easing up sectors of hospitality, be better than a quick start, which may result in restrictions if cases rise? I suppose that's looking at historically what's happened in the last few months.
Yes, I mean, I think this is the big trade-off and discussion that will be had as to Do you want to get some sectors open with quite severe restrictions earlier, potentially having the signal sort of, early March? Or would you prefer to wait 2 or 3 more weeks with a bit more certainty and know that you can reopen? And I think that's the key debate that the government will be having internally, as well as the discussion that it has around do you exit through tiers, or do you exit through national restrictions and a sort of COVID secure workplaces and COVID secure venues. I suspect that is going to be the big topic of discussion for the next 2 to 3 weeks, and at the moment it's just too uncertain. I don't think the government would go back once we've got the vaccine programme in place, and this is why they are keeping stum until they know that there's nothing going to knock that vaccination off track. I don't think they would willingly go back into lockdown again. You've got a couple of things that are advantageous as you come out of that. The time scale, we're moving into better weather, we're moving into times that people can be outside again, and also we're moving out of the key pressures on the NHS with the respiratory system. Winter is traditionally, leave aside COVID, you would have respiratory disease, pneumonia and flu within the general population, and also you have norovirus. Now, interestingly, we don't have any significant levels of those within the general population at the moment, but you're out of that winter crisis, which is the other factor. Now, just to put the vaccination programme in context, and why they are so uncertain about it, in order to hit those timetables and those dates that I talked about, you need to be vaccinating 300,000 people a day. At the start of last week, they were vaccinating 125,000 people a day. At the end of last week, on Friday, they were at 250, and only at the weekend and Monday did they get to 300,000. Now, all you need is a disruption to supply, or you have lots of staff absences and you can't vaccinate people as quickly, or there's something interrupts. And today we had discussions that supply was in the wrong place of the country, in the wrong part of the country, and they needed to move vaccination around. You could see how easily that target of 300,000 a day suddenly gets disrupted on 1 or 2 days, and it knocks the whole thing out. So I think they want some certainty, which is why they're not going to talk about anything to do with reopening until you get to that review of the vaccination programme on the 15th of February.
Thank you. So I suppose the next question really is, you outlined sort of where you would like to be, what you're lobbying for. The key question that all our members and everybody attending will have is when they'll have visibility of that roadmap to reopen the industry. I mean, when are we going to be able to see something in advance of a Boris presentation, or
yes, I suspect you will. As I say, the key milestones that you've got are, and the dates to look out for: 15th of February, they will make a statement to the House of Commons on progress on the vaccination. Now, I don't expect that will be accompanied by, and here's the roadmap for recovery and reopening. But as I say, once you know, the advantage we have this time around is we know at a fixed date and a fixed point in time how many people we've vaccinated, and we know that 2 weeks later they're immune. So I think the minimum you're going to get is 2 weeks. The other dates to look in the diary for, you've got a budget on the 3rd of March, which the Chancellor is going to need to know how quickly you're reopening the economy in order to put that budget together. So I suspect you will start to see an outline, as we had from Boris in May. If you remember, in May, he came out and said, here's the broad exit strategy, and aspirationally we're moving towards 4th of July. To reopen hospitality, and then after that we will reopen other parts of the sector. You can see how you would look to do that. So I would expect you'll get something around end of February, beginning of March, and then middle of March he will have to go to Parliament and say what he is putting in place when the current lockdown regulations fall away on the 31st of March. So the way the legislation is framed is that if nothing happens, the legislation drops and we're open as normal. From the 1st of April, no restrictions, no nothing, no tiers. So he will have to come to Parliament to say, this is what I'm planning to do, and Parliament will want to debate it. So you've got milestones within Parliament of the 15th of February, 3rd of March, and then the middle of March, when they will be pushing and putting pressure on about reopening. And that's when we might be coming back to you to say they've got it wrong, or they haven't included X, Y, and Z, or they've forgotten about X, Y, and Z, and we need to put pressure on them to change it.
Thank you. Before we move on to a number of questions about students' careers, I think we've got that slide just on the confidence that we're all feeling. So I mean, that is generally saying that somewhat confident about 2021 in the business. Is about
You're obviously more confident in the West Midlands than the rest of the country.
Well, yes, I suppose that's the that's the concern, I suppose.
Yeah, the rest of the country is 1 in 5 are confident about recovery.
Interesting. Okay, thank you. Yes, before we run out of time, because we're coming towards the end, there was a number of questions around students and careers. Thank you to Ian Williams, James Greaves, Katie Walker, David Moss, David Mulcahy, Jessica Munt and Emma Davidson. So direct on this, do you think a career in hospitality will be less appealing once things begin to return to normality due to the lack of support for this sector during the pandemic?
I actually think it'll be more attractive, and I think that's in our hands to make it more attractive. We have a huge amount of goodwill politically, within the general public, within the media for hospitality. With the way we have been able to maintain hospitality at the front of the debate in all of those audience minds throughout this pandemic. I mean, we've basically been in the news every week for 12 months. We've been right front and centre, and people have missed their local pub, they've missed their local restaurant, they've missed going on holiday, they've missed a whole load of experiences. There's a great groundswell of opinion in favour of hospitality. And as part of that as well, there has been a re-evaluation and an appreciation of what our teams do to get people through their everyday lives. We make people's lives a little bit better. And we need to hold on to that. We don't sell products. We're not a commodity. We sell experiences, we sell feelings, and we sell an ability to bring friends and family together. And that will come out. It won't last forever, but you will come out with that warm opinion towards us and an appreciation of what we do. And we need to build on that. And we have got plans in place to be able to restart all of the discussions we were having about careers. The other thing that we've got going for us is that we're coming out into a negative jobs market, where lots of other industries that have gone through structural reform, retail, distribution, those jobs are not coming back. Travel, international travel and airlines, those jobs are not coming back quickly, but retail has structurally changed. So you've got a large amount of unemployed people who want to reskill and want to move in. And we've got all the positives of local careers in places where you live, at any skill level, any age level. We can take you, we can train you, we can upskill you, and here's our program to do it. So we need to make the most of it. And I think we really need to be positive, and we need to start talking ourselves up. And I think we need to capitalize on the fact, I would also question the end of that question. We haven't had low levels of support. If you think back to where we were at the start of this pandemic and what we have delivered, yes, we haven't got everything we asked for, but we would be in an immeasurably worse place had we not had some of the government support that was put in place directly to support hospitality. You have to remember, furlough was designed to support hospitality and retail jobs through this crisis. No other reason. Everybody else has benefited, but there's a huge long list of things that the government has given us, and it really, we have to stop saying that we've had no support and that we're not valued. We have been. It's not enough. It's never enough. But we are supported, we are valued, and to have the Prime Minister and the Chancellor continually talking about how much hospitality matters and how much more we need to do, and they're going to support us. As I say, it's not enough, it's never enough, but we can't deny that we are front and centre.
Thank you. Question about apprentices. Do you agree that government funding for apprentices needs to be brought back to help people retrain to help get the sector back on its feet?
Gosh, I think it's going to be very difficult in the current climate when we're talking about the need that the businesses have for business rates and VAT support to be talking about government funding for apprenticeships. But I do think we can have a conversation with the government about making sure that we don't lose our apprenticeship money. And that apprenticeship pot that was circulating, that we've all paid into throughout this, but not been able to pull back, is brought back into the sector and supports upskilling and apprenticeships. We are going to need to invest in it, and the government is also going to need us to be at full strength. So I think it's an open dialogue to have with government. I think it's unlikely in the short term, given the amount of spend that we're asking for, that we'll get it to support apprenticeships. But I do think it's worthwhile having that conversation around the levy.
I'm going to ask the final question, but it's two different questions rolled into one before we just sort of wrap up for today. As an industry, what can we do to attract people to come and work in hospitality? And what do you think will be the industry's reaction to taking on new graduates over the next year or two?
Gosh, I think two really good questions to finish on. I think there's 2 points to the graduate point. Going to have a lot of young people who've had a really poor experience of going through university and are going to come out the other side of it. And I think we need to make sure that they can understand how attractive we are as a career. So we need to be better at talking in the language of young people that will appeal to them and explaining the benefits of a career in hospitality, not just in the front line, but sort of the breadth of careers that are open. And it's not just for hospitality graduates. I think it is for general graduates. They are going to come out into a job market that is incredibly tough. And a lot of people who never thought that they were going to work in sectors are going to do that. I graduated in the 1991 graduate recession, where loads of people came out thinking one thing and found they had no jobs and had great career opportunities in hospitality and fell into it by chance. And I think we're going to take advantage of that. And we just need to be selling the benefits to young people, whether they choose to come to us after graduation or as an alternative. And that's the other point about university. Lots of people are going to be deciding not to go to university because it's not much fun at university at the moment. And I've got an 18-year-old daughter, and you know, they're missing out on all of that life experience that university gives you. Hospitality gives you that life experience. If you're working in hotels, you can travel around the world. You can go to glamorous locations. The key thing that we need to emphasize for young people, no other industry at such a young age will give you such a high level of responsibility in such a short period of time. And that's what we need to be picking up at. And I sat around a table with lots of people looking at seat at the table and talking about getting the great and the good of the industry to talk about how they had worked their way up and through their career. And it's like, no, you need 24-year-olds who talk about in 2 years, I've gone from floor to management level and I'm now moving towards et cetera, et cetera. So we need to appeal to and talk to their language. And that I think is the fundamental point from my point of view about careers and attracting people in. Sell the benefits. Yes, it's hard work, but no industry, nothing worth having is not hard work. But, and that's the final point. We need to look in the same way that we're asking government to look at all of the surrounding structures for our industry to make sure that they're fit for purpose. We need to make sure our employment practices are fit for purpose. I would urge all the hoteliers on the call to sign up to the Hotels Charter to make sure that we've got a badge of good practice so you can say we are a good employer, which is just about to be launched in sort of February, March time, but it sort of lists all the things we will do to make sure we support you as an employee in your career with us in hotels. And then we need to just revisit all of our practices. I get so fed up of people saying, well, we have the same people checking you in as the same people who check you out because that is the way we have always done it. We don't have split shifts in the kitchen because that is the way we have always done it. We need to move on and be modern. And young people do want plurality in their careers. They do want flexibility. And also lots of the returning mums who've worked in retail will want that flexibility too. So we are the most flexible career. And we just need to sell those positives instead of talking down the negatives of our sector all the time. We're very good at talking internally about how bad we are, and that reflects outwardly as well. So we need to be positive.
Thank you. That point about responsibility, that actually echoes my own experience. So, and that is actually a massive positive that you will carry you forward for the rest of your life, I would suggest. We are nearly out of time. Kate Nicholls OBE, thank you very much for joining us. It's been really enjoyable and very useful and interesting. I hope everyone else has got a lot from this last hour. Before I pass over to our chairman, Sam Goss, just to say a few words, it's an interesting point to note. Our next event is on the 4th of March. It's a panel discussion with representatives from different sectors talking about careers and what's available within those different sectors. It aims at students, but also, given what's been going on, anyone who may be looking at retraining to join the hospitality industry. So I would heartily recommend that to anybody you know who's thinking about what to do, or maybe you're in a position where you might be looking to offer something. Thank you very much. Sam, do you want to say just a few words before we say goodbye to everyone?
Very much, Jim, and thank you again to Kate Nicholls OBE for taking this time to share her experience and knowledge, her expertise, and to answer our questions. There have been a number of specific questions raised as well in relation to the Institute of Hospitality, and we will respond directly to those individuals who have raised those great questions. The Institute of Hospitality is the professional body for our industry, our fantastic industry. We're here to support, assist, and to promote continual personal and professional development. Been rightfully mentioned our next event being the 4th of March. We also have a more informal coffee and chat sort of event coming up on Friday the 29th of January at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So that's Friday the 29th of January at 2 for an informal coffee and chat. If you are not currently a member of the Institute of Hospitality, I would strongly advise and encourage you to sign up. It is extremely beneficial. And together, let's collectively keep on supporting our wonderful industry. Let's keep on supporting everybody on this call because we have got an exciting future ahead of us. We do make people's lives just a little bit better, as Kate mentioned. So thank you very much for your time. And I look forward to hopefully seeing you in person soon, but if not, at one of our next virtual events. So thank you. And also, sorry, one last thing was a massive thank you to the committee. A lot of hard work has gone into arranging these events, and it would be remiss of me to miss them. So massive thank you to the committee who have worked and volunteered tirelessly to bring these events together. So thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone. Have a very good evening.